The mysterious signal. In the vast emptiness of space, far beyond the borders of the Galactic Coalition's influence, something strange happened. The dark, quiet void of the galaxy had always been home to silence, a place where nothing moved, and nothing of importance ever occurred. Yet, on this particular day, a signal pierced that silence. Out of nowhere. It wasn't a normal signal, nothing routine or expected. This one was different. It was irregular, almost like a message hidden beneath layers of noise. For the alien fleet patrolling the outer edges of known space, it was a cause for concern. The aliens had seen nothing like this before. The signal was faint, its origin unclear, and there were no records of any known species or technology capable of sending such a transmission. The signal was a mystery, and mysteries were never something the Galactic Coalition liked to leave unchecked. The alien admiral, a seasoned leader who had faced countless battles and conflicts, sat in the command room aboard the flagship of the fleet. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the holographic displays, casting an eerie light on the admiral's stern face. He studied the signal that had been picked up by the fleet's long-range sensors. It had come from a sector that had long been abandoned, a place that was not home to any known species, let alone the humans. "Send it to the Central Analysis Hub," the admiral ordered, his voice calm. But there was a hint of curiosity beneath the surface. He had been through many encounters in his long career, but this felt different. The signal didn't match anything in their records. It was almost as if it was deliberately designed to confuse. Within moments, the Central Analysis Hub began to buzz with activity. Alien officers, each with their own unique appearance and skills, worked quickly to decode the signal. They tried every tool at their disposal, but nothing seemed to make sense. Each attempt only deepened the mystery. The signal was erratic, constantly shifting in frequency and intensity. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered. "It's not a natural phenomenon," one of the officers remarked, his voice filled with disbelief. It's a deliberate transmission." The admiral leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the readouts. Who would send such a signal in the middle of nowhere? He muttered to himself. The more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. There was no known species in that part of space. It wasn't even an area where travelers would venture. The emptiness of the sector had earned it the nickname, the Black Zone. Only a fool would wander out there. And yet, here they were dealing with a signal that seemed to come from the heart of this very void. "What does the signal say?" the admiral demanded, his voice sharper now. "Is it a warning, a distress call?" The officers quickly began to analyze the message, attempting to decode it. What they found was unsettling. The signal wasn't in any known language. Instead, it was a series of repeating patterns, almost like a code, but not one they could crack immediately. It felt intentional, purposeful. As they delved deeper, they found that these patterns were aligned in a way that suggested intelligence, something purposeful behind the transmission. The admiral's mind raced. Could this be a message from a species the coalition had never encountered? Or perhaps it was a message from humanity. The humans had been extinct for 1,000 years. At least that's what everyone had believed. How could they be responsible for something like this? The officers continued to work on the signal, their eyes flickering with concern. But the admiral couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched by something far greater than they realized. He stood up suddenly, pacing back and forth across the command room. "Send a fleet to investigate the source. We must find out what this is," the admiral ordered firmly. His command was clear. The signal was too important to ignore. The alien fleet was powerful, capable of conquering entire star systems with ease, but this signal was different. It was a signal that no one had anticipated. As the admiral stood there, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease wash over him. Something was out there, something waiting, and it didn't belong to any species they knew. As the fleet moved to respond, a new feeling began to stir within the admiral, something that had never crossed his mind in all his years of commanding. Fear. For the first time, he wondered if this would be a battle they could win. After all, the signal had come from a place no one ever ventured, the deep void, a region of space that was not only difficult to navigate but one that had been ignored by the galactic powers for centuries. The fleet moved slowly toward the signal source, every crew member watching the sensors, waiting for the unknown to unfold. The silence of space was interrupted only by the soft hum of the ship's engines and the faint pulse of the mysterious signal. Then something strange happened. The signal, which had been weak and erratic, suddenly strengthened. It intensified, like a heartbeat echoing in the dark vastness of space. The Admiral's heart skipped a beat. The transmission was no longer a mystery. It was a warning. The unknown was about to reveal itself. The question now was, what was waiting for them in the cold darkness of the void? The Admiral's instincts screamed at him to turn back, to retreat. But it was too late. The fleet was already moving forward, drawn toward the signal like moths to a flame. And what they would find next would change the course of history forever. The galaxy would never be the same again. As the alien fleet ventured deeper into the unknown, tension hung thick in the air. The once silent void now seemed to pulse with life, the faint signal growing louder with every passing moment. The Admiral stood in his command center, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the view screen that showed the fleet's movement into the heart of the mysterious sector. The hum of the ship's engines was steady, but inside, the crew felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them. Officers and crew members alike exchanged uneasy glances. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the occasional clicking of buttons and murmurs of the crew working tirelessly to analyze the growing signal. "We are nearing the source," one of the officers called out. His voice was strained, as though the growing signal was beginning to take its toll on him. The Admiral nodded. "Good. Prepare for any situation. I don't want any surprises." There was an edge to his voice, one that came from years of experience facing the unknown. He had seen his fair share of threats, but this felt different, unsettlingly different. Something about this mission didn't sit right with him. Was it the signal itself, or was it the fact that no one knew what lay ahead? The fleet's ships, massive and imposing, slowly advanced through the cold void. Each ship was equipped with advanced technology and formidable weapons, ready for whatever danger awaited them. Yet, as they moved, it felt as if they were being led into a trap. The signal's intensity grew, as though it was guiding them, drawing them deeper into the heart of the unknown. "Admiral, the signal, it's changing," reported a technician, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "It's not just increasing in strength, it's shifting. It's almost as if it's adapting." Adapting. The Admiral's voice grew sharp. "What do you mean?" The technician hesitated. "It's like the signal is reacting to us. As we approach, it's altering its frequency. It's almost alive." The Admiral's brow furrowed. Nothing about this was making sense. Signals didn't adapt. They were just data. But this one was different. This was something he could no longer ignore. This wasn't just a message. It was a puzzle, a challenge that the fleet had to solve. And the consequences of failing to do so were beginning to weigh heavily on him. "Full speed ahead," the Admiral ordered, trying to push away the growing unease in his gut. "We need to reach the source before it gets any more complicated." The ships surged forward, their sleek hulls cutting through space with a swift, mechanical precision. As the fleet continued to close in on the signal's origin, the Admiral's mind raced. What kind of force was out there? What could possibly be so important that it had been hidden in this desolate corner of the galaxy? Was it a trap? A weapon? Or something even more dangerous? The silence of space seemed to grow even heavier, suffocating the crew with a sense of impending doom. Yet, no one dared to speak it aloud. They all shared the same thought. They were walking into something they couldn't fully understand. A few moments later, the ship's radar pinged, indicating an object ahead. The crew stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the blip. It was large, far larger than anything they had seen before. "Is that the source of the signal?" the Admiral asked, his voice tense. "Possibly, sir. It's hard to say. But it's coming up on our path." The ships continued to move forward, the mysterious object growing larger as they approached. It was not a natural formation. Its shape was too perfect, too angular. It had been built, but by whom? And why had it been hidden here, so far from civilization? The object was now visible to the fleet's crew, its surface dark and imposing, unlike any ship or structure the Admiral had ever seen. It was massive, dwarfing even the flagship of the alien fleet. The technology it displayed was unlike anything in the Coalition's arsenal. Smooth black surfaces shimmered in the light of the distant stars. What kind of power did it hold? "Prepare to hail the vessel," the Admiral ordered. "Let's see who, or what, has been waiting for us." A tense silence fell over the command room as the communication officers scrambled to establish contact. Yet, as they worked, the signal began to shift again, this time even more intensely than before. The Admiral's eyes widened as he watched the readings. "It's sending something back," one of the officers said, his voice barely a whisper. A response. Before anyone could react, the strange object ahead of them emitted a brilliant pulse of light. It was blinding, too bright to be natural. The energy it released washed over the fleet, flooding the ship's systems with a surge of unknown data. "Shut down all systems," the Admiral shouted, but it was too late. The fleet's ships were already locked in the grip of the mysterious signal. For a moment, everything went dark. The lights flickered, and the hum of the engines died, leaving an eerie stillness in their wake. The crew scrambled to restore power, but the signal had already done its damage. And then, as quickly as it had started, everything returned to normal. The lights flickered back on. The ship's systems hummed with life once more. But something had changed. The fleet was no longer alone. The silent void had given way to something far more terrifying. The Admiral stood frozen, his mind racing. They had reached the source of the signal. But now the question was no longer about finding it. The question was, what had it done to them? What had they awakened? And more importantly, what would happen next? The silence that followed the surge of energy was deafening. The Admiral stood motionless, staring at the dark screen in front of him. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The fleet had been drawn into this anomaly, but now they were no longer in control. Something had changed, something deep and profound. "Admiral, we're receiving new data." The communication officer's voice broke through the tense atmosphere. His words sounded rushed, filled with an urgency the Admiral could feel tightening in his chest. "The object ahead, it's changing." "What do you mean, changing?" The Admiral's voice was sharp, a slight tremor betraying the rising panic inside him. He had always prided himself on staying calm in the face of danger, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "The object, it's shifting. It's not just sitting there anymore," the officer replied. "It seems to be responding to us." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. This was no longer just a mysterious signal. This was something far more complex, something alive with intent. The object had been waiting, watching, and now it was interacting. But why? And how? The command room was now a flurry of activity, as officers worked desperately to analyze the readings flooding in from their sensors. The mysterious object was still there, looming just ahead, but it had begun to pulse with a strange energy, an energy that seemed to be alive in its own right. "Bring up the visual feed," the Admiral ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Let's see it for ourselves." A moment later, the image on the large screen flickered, revealing the object in all its dark, imposing glory. It was even more massive than they had first realized. It wasn't just a ship, it was an entire structure, possibly even a city, built in the shape of a vast, sleek fortress. It glowed faintly, as though powered by some unknown force. "What are we dealing with here?" The Admiral muttered under his breath. Who would build something like this? And why hide it in the deepest corners of space? A voice interrupted his thoughts. Admiral, we've decoded part of the signal's data. It's a message. A message. The Admiral's heart skipped a beat. The significance of that word hung heavily in the air. Could this truly be a message from whoever had left this structure behind? A message from an ancient civilization, or something else entirely? Yes, sir. We're working on interpreting it now, the officer confirmed. It's unlike any language we've encountered. It's almost as if it's not meant to be understood by our species. The Admiral clenched his fists, his mind whirling with possibilities. What are you trying to say? It's not a language we can decode. The officer hesitated before responding. It's not just the language, Admiral. The structure. It's almost as though it's sentient. We're not sure how, but it feels like it's aware of us. The room fell into a stunned silence. The Admiral's thoughts swirled with confusion. A sentient object. It was a concept beyond anything they had ever prepared for. But it made sense. The response, the signal, the way it seemed to adapt. This was no ordinary technology. Can we respond to it? The Admiral asked, his mind now moving into action. We are trying to, the officer replied, but it's not like any communication system we've used. It's as if it's waiting for something. Waiting for something. The question echoed in the Admiral's mind. But what could it be waiting for? Suddenly, the ship's alarms went off. A red light blinked urgently, and the deck shook slightly as if the very ship was being drawn toward the structure. The Admiral's eyes widened in realization. We're being pulled in, he barked. Full reverse. Evasive maneuvers now. But it was too late. The gravitational pull of the object was too strong. The fleet's ships were no match for the force pulling them toward the unknown. Desperately, the crew worked to reroute power, to break free from the invisible grip of the structure, but it was no use. A blinding light flared across the command room as a beam of energy shot out from the mysterious object, hitting the lid ship of the fleet. The ship shuddered violently, and the crew's cries echoed through the speakers as they tried to hold on. The Admiral felt a chill run down his spine. This was no mere signal, it was a trap, and they had walked right into it. Admiral, the fleet is locked in place, an officer reported, voice trembling. The object, it's taking control of our ships. The Admiral's mind raced as the gravity of the situation settled over him. What had they awakened? Who, or what, was behind this object? And what was its purpose? For the first time in his career, the Admiral felt true fear. Not for his own life, but for the lives of his crew, and for the future of his people. This was only the beginning. They had made contact with something far greater than they had ever imagined. And now, they were trapped. What happens next? The officer asked, breaking the silence that had gripped the room. The Admiral stared at the glowing object on the screen, its pulsing light beckoning them closer. I don't know, he whispered, but I have a feeling we're about to find out. The relentless pull of the mysterious object had become undeniable. It was as if the very fabric of space around them had warped, drawing the fleet inexorably toward the dark structure. Despite their best efforts to resist, the ships remained locked in place, helpless against the powerful force emanating from the object. In the command room, the tension was suffocating. Officers worked feverishly at their stations, trying to regain control of their ships, but the situation only seemed to grow worse by the minute. The Admiral stood, his hands clenched into fists as he stared at the screen. The pulsating glow of the structure grew brighter, as if it was feeding off their struggle. Admiral, we're losing power, an officer reported, his voice tinged with panic. The entire fleet is caught in a gravitational lock. We can't break free. The Admiral's jaw tightened. He knew they were in deep trouble, but this was beyond anything they had ever prepared for. The enemy had always been visible, tangible, ships, weapons, armies. But this was something else. It was an enigma, something that defied all logic and understanding. "Get me a status report from the lead ship," the admiral ordered, his voice cold and steady. One of the communication officers quickly patched into the lead ship's comms. The static-filled transmission echoed through the room. "Admiral, this is Commander Rix. We don't know what to do. The object, it's speaking to us. Not with words, but with images. It's showing us things. Visions. Visions." The admiral's mind raced. What did that mean? What kind of visions? "It's hard to describe, sir," Commander Rix continued, voice trembling. "It's like 1,000 different memories, all colliding at once. Images of war, destruction, endless conflict. And then, there's something else. A single figure, watching us, waiting for us." The admiral's stomach churned. This was no simple communication. It was something far more complex, something far older than anything they had ever encountered. Was this object even truly a machine, or was it something else entirely? Was it alive? "Commander, focus," the admiral said, forcing his voice to remain firm. "What do you see now?" For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then, Commander Rix's voice came through again, this time softer, more reverent. "It's showing us our past, our ancestors, their rise and fall. But it's not just our history, Admiral. It's showing us our future. And it's not what we expected. There's something coming, something even more powerful than us." The admiral felt a shiver run down his spine. He wasn't sure whether he should be more frightened by the visions of the past or the cryptic warning about the future. "Keep your team focused, Commander," the admiral ordered. "We need to understand what this entity is trying to tell us before it's too late." As the admiral turned back to face the screen, he saw that the mysterious object had grown even larger, its light filling the entire display. Its shape was now clearer, as if revealing itself more fully with each passing moment. The structure wasn't just an artifact. It was a ship, a colossal vessel unlike any the fleet had ever encountered. It was ancient, and its design was unlike anything from any known civilization. For a brief moment, the admiral's thoughts turned to the past. His people had always been proud of their ships, their fleets, technological marvels that had been built for one purpose: to fight. But now, in the face of this alien behemoth, his pride seemed meaningless. They were facing something far older, far more powerful, and they were helpless in its presence. "Admiral," the voice of the communications officer broke through his thoughts. "We've detected something. Something moving inside the object. It's not just a ship. It's a city, a whole civilization. But it's dormant. Everything about it is still." "What do you mean, dormant?" The admiral turned to face the officer. "How can a whole civilization be dormant? Is it alive?" The officer hesitated. "It's hard to explain, sir, but it's almost as if it's waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it, and we believe that someone is us." The admiral's heart skipped a beat. "Us?" "Yes, sir. We're picking up faint signals from the structure itself, almost like it's trying to communicate. It's subtle, but it's there." The admiral rubbed his eyes, trying to focus through the fog of confusion. "What are we dealing with here? Is this a trap, or is it an invitation?" No one had an answer. For a moment, the admiral simply stood there, taking in the enormity of the situation. His mind was racing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had stepped into something far larger than they could comprehend. The structure wasn't just a piece of alien technology. It was a key to something else, something far older and far more powerful. And it was waiting for them. A sudden jolt shook the ship, bringing the admiral back to reality. The gravitational pull had intensified again, and now the object was drawing them in at an accelerating rate. Desperately, the fleet's engines roared to life, pushing against the force, but it was no use. They were being dragged in, caught in the pull of something ancient and unfathomable. "Prepare for impact," the Admiral shouted, his voice laced with urgency. "Brace for what's coming next." But deep down, he knew that whatever awaited them, they weren't ready. The only thing they could do now was face it, whatever it was, and hope that they could survive the revelation that was about to unfold. The lights in the command room flickered as the countdown to contact began. They were no longer just explorers or soldiers. They were part of something far bigger, something that would change the course of their history forever. And they were about to make first contact with it. The moment of impact came suddenly, as the vast structure enveloped the fleet with a deafening silence. The ships were drawn closer, their engines straining against the irresistible pull, but nothing could stop the inevitable. The moment they crossed into the shadow of the colossal object, everything went dark. The lights in the command room flickered and then went out completely. For several long moments, there was nothing but absolute blackness. "Report," the Admiral barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The communications officer scrambled at his console, desperately trying to re-establish contact with the fleet. Static filled the room, creating an eerie tension. We're still here, sir," the officer said, voice trembling. "The ships are intact, but we can't reach the others. It's like there's a barrier between us and the rest of the fleet." A ripple of unease spread across the bridge. The Admiral clenched his fists. He knew this was no ordinary situation. Something was happening, something they couldn't yet comprehend. "Activate auxiliary power," the Admiral ordered. The dim emergency lights flickered on, casting a ghostly glow over the room. The ship's systems slowly came back online, though it was clear they were still trapped, disconnected from the rest of the fleet. A deep rumble vibrated through the ship. It was subtle at first, like the hum of distant thunder, but it grew steadily louder. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that whatever was about to happen next, they were not prepared for it. And then it happened. The ship shuddered violently, as if struck by some unseen force. The walls of the command room groaned under the pressure, and the crew braced themselves for impact. But instead of a collision, they heard a sound, a soft, alien hum, filling the air. It wasn't mechanical, but biological. It was the sound of something alive. The object, this enormous and ancient structure, was awakening. "Admiral," one of the officers said in a hushed tone, "we're picking up strange readings from the structure. It's alive, sir. At least it feels like it. It's almost as if it's reacting to us, sensing our presence." The Admiral's heart pounded in his chest. "What are you saying? That this thing is sentient?" The officer nodded. "Yes, sir. We believe so. And I think it's aware of us. It's watching us." Before the Admiral could respond, another officer called out, "There's something coming, approaching at high speed." A strange, bright light flashed on the view screen. It was not the typical signal of an incoming ship, but rather a beam of energy. It pierced through the darkness, cutting a path across space, like a laser beam searching for something. The entire ship shuddered again as the light swept over them, passing through the hull without harming them. It was as if the beam was scanning them, taking measure of their very essence. The Admiral stood motionless, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. "What in the universe is this?" he whispered to himself. Suddenly, a voice, clear and unyielding, echoed through the bridge. It wasn't spoken aloud, but rather transmitted directly into their minds, bypassing their ears altogether. It was the same voice they had heard earlier in the visions from the object. "We are awake. You are here. Welcome to our domain." The voice wasn't just a simple greeting. It carried a sense of foreboding, as if it held knowledge far beyond the comprehension of mere mortals. The words sent a chill down the Admiral's spine. This was no ordinary encounter. It was a meeting with something ancient, something powerful. The Admiral took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Identify yourself," he demanded. "What are you?" For a brief moment, there was silence. Then the voice returned, colder than before. "We are the Keepers. We are the first. We are the creators of the endless cycle. You are but one of many that have come to us, but unlike the others, you are different." The crew exchanged confused glances. The keeper, whoever or whatever it was, spoke as if they had been waiting for humanity. The implications of those words were enormous. "What do you mean, different?" the Admiral asked, his voice tight with both fear and curiosity. "What are you waiting for?" "You carry the key," the voice replied, its tone now filled with what could only be described as anticipation. "The key to our return. The key to the beginning of the end." The Admiral felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This wasn't a simple alien encounter. This was something far grander. It felt like they had stumbled into a prophecy, a destiny that they couldn't avoid, no matter how hard they tried. "We don't understand," the Admiral said, his voice shaking now. "What do you mean by the beginning of the end?" A deep rumble shook the ship once more, and the voice answered in a way that chilled them all to the core. "You will understand in time, but now you must prove your worth. You are not the first to seek us, but you will be the last." Before the Admiral could respond, the communication channel cut off abruptly, leaving nothing but a haunting silence in its wake. The eerie hum of the ship continued, its vibrations now resonating through the very core of the vessel. The Admiral stood, motionless, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. His people had been through countless battles, faced enemies from every corner of the galaxy, but nothing had prepared them for this. The true nature of the object, the keepers, and what lay ahead were still mysteries. But one thing was certain: the encounter with this ancient force was only the beginning. The key had been placed in their hands, and the future of not only humanity but the entire galaxy was at stake. And the Admiral knew, in the pit of his stomach, that the worst was yet to come. As the ship hovered in the vast emptiness of space, the crew tried to make sense of the cryptic message they had just received. The looming presence of the Keeper, the entity that had spoken directly into their minds, still weighed heavily on them. They had been thrust into an ancient conflict far beyond their understanding. And now, it seemed they were being drawn deeper into something none of them could have ever imagined. Admiral Ronner stood at the head of the command room, his eyes fixed on the darkened view screen. It was impossible to tear his mind away from the cryptic words that echoed in his thoughts. "You carry the key to our return, the key to the beginning of the end." What did it mean? What had they done to earn such a response? And what had this ancient, seemingly omnipotent force meant by the beginning of the end? He looked down at his hands, tightly gripping the rail in front of him, the tension mounting with every passing second. It was no longer just about the battle. It was about survival. The fate of humanity, and perhaps all sentient life, now seemed to rest on the choices they would make in the coming hours. "We need to know more," Admiral Ronner finally said, breaking the oppressive silence. "Prepare the fleet for immediate action. We must make contact with that object again." His voice was firm, yet beneath the surface, doubt gnawed at him. Could they really handle whatever lay ahead? "Sir," Lieutenant Era spoke up from behind him, her voice laced with anxiety. "What if it's a trap? What if we are being led into something we don't fully understand?" Admiral Ronner turned to face her, his stern expression softened by the concern in her words. "I don't know, Lieutenant," he admitted, "but we don't have a choice. Whatever this force is, it has a power we can't even begin to comprehend. We must learn more before it's too late." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Everyone knew the risks. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation. But the unknowns were terrifying, and there was no way of knowing if they were playing into the hands of something far darker than they could ever imagine. "Sir, we have incoming data from the fleet," a communications officer announced, breaking the silence. "There's something strange. It looks like a fleet of unknown ships, but they're not responding to our hails. They're moving toward the Keeper." Admiral Ronner's eyes snapped to the officer. "What do you mean, unknown ships?" "We've never seen anything like them before, sir. They're different. They move in unison, like they're part of something larger. We think they might be under the control of the Keeper. The Admiral's mind raced. Could the Keeper have control over other ships in the galaxy? Could these ships be part of a larger force? "Show me the visual feed," Ronner ordered, his voice steady despite the anxiety that threatened to rise within him. The view screen flickered, and then a new image appeared. It was nothing like the sleek, advanced human vessels they had come to recognize. These ships were massive, dark, and covered in strange markings that pulsed with an unnatural glow. They seemed to be constructed from materials that were beyond anything humans had ever seen, biological, almost living in appearance. The fleet of alien ships formed a perfect formation as they approached the Keeper's immense structure. The sight was chilling. For the first time, Ronner could feel the magnitude of what they were facing. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy. They're moving toward the Keeper. What are they doing? Lieutenant Era asked, her voice tight with worry. They're preparing to make contact, Ronner said slowly. They're aligning themselves with the object. I don't think this is a battle. It's something else. What could be more terrifying than a battle? Era muttered under her breath. Ronner's gaze never wavered from the screen. The unknown ships continued their silent march toward the Keeper, as if drawn to it by some unspoken force. What kind of power could command this kind of obedience? The room held its breath as the ships neared the Keeper. But just as they were about to make contact, the situation shifted again. A sudden flash of light, a blinding, searing beam, shot out from the massive structure. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. The beam didn't just strike the ships, it engulfed them. The alien vessels were consumed by the light, their forms disintegrating in an instant, leaving nothing behind but particles of ash. Impossible, Era whispered. How could anything do that? Ronner felt his heart skip a beat. The sheer power of the Keeper was terrifying. But then, something even more unsettling happened. The light from the Keeper flickered, as if searching for something, or someone. Ronner's breath caught in his throat. Was it searching for them? Before he could voice his concerns, the voice of the Keeper echoed in their minds once more. This time, it was colder, sharper, with an edge of something darker. You have been warned. You are not ready. Your time has not come. The words were like ice in Ronner's veins. He knew what the Keeper meant now. They weren't just being watched. They were being judged. Their very existence was being weighed in the balance, and if they were found wanting, they would be swept away like the others. The Keeper had no tolerance for failure, no patience for weakness. And if humanity wasn't ready for what was coming, they would be erased from the galaxy's history, as if they had never existed. The Admiral's voice was barely a whisper as he spoke, his words heavy with the gravity of the moment. We have to prove ourselves. We have to show the Keeper that humanity is ready. As the crew waited for their next move, a chilling thought settled in the back of Ronner's mind. Could they really survive what was coming? Could they truly prove themselves worthy of the Keeper's mercy? The only thing he knew for sure was that whatever came next, the future of humanity, and the galaxy itself, was in their hands. The tension in the command room was palpable. Admiral Ronner stood before the view screen, his eyes fixed on the cold, distant shape of the Keeper's structure. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The pulse of light from the ancient artifact had faded, but its implications were far from over. Now the question that loomed over everyone in the room was clear. Could humanity prove itself worthy, or would it be destroyed? The crew had prepared for battle, yet they knew this was no ordinary fight. This was not about firepower or tactics. It was about something deeper, something ancient and beyond comprehension. They were up against a force that had seen civilizations rise and fall, a being whose power could erase entire fleets with the flick of a switch. Ronner's mind raced as he recalled the chilling message from the Keeper. You are not ready. Your time has not come. He had to believe that humanity could change that. They had to show the Keeper that their ingenuity, their resilience, and their willingness to fight for survival made them worthy of existence. But how could they prove it to an entity so far beyond their understanding? He turned to Lieutenant Era, who had been silent for what felt like an eternity. Her face was pale, but there was a fire in her eyes, a fire he knew all too well. "What do you think?" Ronar asked her quietly. Era looked up at him, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We fight, sir. We show them that we are not just survivors. We're more than that. We've always been more." Ronar nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. It was true. Humanity had always been more than the sum of its parts. From the moment they first set foot on Earth, they had survived against overwhelming odds. From the darkest depths of war to the vast reaches of space, they had overcome. But this was unlike anything they had ever faced before. "We're ready," Ronar said, his voice firm. "Set course for the Keeper. Prepare for any eventuality. If we're going to prove ourselves, we do it now." The crew sprang into action, executing their orders with precision. The massive human fleet, once scattered across the stars, now moved as one, unified, focused, ready for whatever lay ahead. The adrenaline in the air was electric. There was no turning back. They would either prove their worth, or they would fall. As the fleet advanced toward the Keeper, a strange, unexplainable calm washed over Ronar. The lights of distant stars flickered outside the viewport, and for a moment, everything seemed still. The vastness of space stretched on, infinite and uncaring. Yet, here they were, humanity's last stand against a force beyond their comprehension. The Keeper's structure loomed larger on the screen, its mysterious surface glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. It was beautiful and terrifying at once, a monument to something ancient, something that had stood the test of time and space. Ronar's thoughts shifted to his crew, his people. They had come so far. But was it enough? Was humanity ready to face the reckoning that was about to unfold? The tension in the room grew unbearable as the fleet drew closer to the Keeper. Every eye was fixed on the screen, every heartbeat synchronized with the approaching climax of this strange encounter. Would the Keeper destroy them, or would it accept humanity's challenge? Suddenly, the deep, resonant voice of the Keeper filled their minds once more. "You have come far, human, but will it be enough?" The words hit with the weight of 1,000 storms, each syllable reverberating deep in their souls. The Keeper was testing them, testing humanity's resolve, its strength, its worth. "We're not here to beg for mercy," Ronar responded, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "We're here to show you that we belong. We fight for our future, and we will never back down." There was a long pause, an unbearable silence, as the Keeper seemed to consider the words. Then, finally, it spoke again. "Very well. Let the test begin." In that moment, everything changed. The view screen flickered, and the dark expanse of space seemed to warp and twist. Time itself felt as though it was stretching, bending, becoming something unrecognizable. The massive Keeper structure pulsed with an even greater energy now, as though it was alive, watching them, waiting for them to prove their worth. Without warning, the fleet was plunged into an entirely new reality. It wasn't just a test of their technology, of their combat skills. It was a test of their very essence, their ability to adapt, to think, to survive. The skies above Earth darkened as an array of unknown obstacles materialized before them. An alien force that was as much a riddle as it was a challenge. Humanity's ships, once the pinnacle of human achievement, were now up against forces they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Ronar felt something stir within him. A sense of hope, a sense of pride in his people. They had been tested countless times before, but this was the final test. If humanity could survive this, they would earn their place in the stars. If they could show the Keeper that they were more than just a fleeting moment in history, they would prove that they were worthy to exist. The fleet began to engage. The hum of the engines, the rapid fire of weapons, and the chaotic brilliance of the human spirit filled the command room. It was a battle unlike anything they had ever faced, chaotic, unpredictable, yet full of hope. And for the first time, Ronner believed they could win. Humanity had come far, and it was not about to fall now.